and recording it here. Okay. Parshas Beshalach. Ooh, more people came in. So Parshas Beshalach. I love this piece that we're about to do today. I don't think I've ever done it in this year. I think I've taught it in other places. But this is why this year is why I love learning Torah, because there is such depth to Torah that when we read it superficially, we don't always see, we don't always perceive, we don't always really get a lot of the underlying messages that are there, and even storylines that are there. And yet when we see it through the lenses of the great commentators, they really open up our eyes, and the Torah becomes so majestic, and there's such breadth and such depth and such incredible, powerful lessons there. And this is an example of one of them. So let's begin. Before we even begin the piece, I just want to, we should really have Chumashim here. We should do that so we could actually look in the Psukim together. People on Zoom, I'm going to open up the pasuk so they'll see it. So I'm going to share the screen, but okay, for those who are here in person, you don't have the actual pasuk, but we'll read it out loud and it'll be familiar to you. It's the very beginning of our Parsha. So I'm going to open up the screen here. So for those who are on Zoom, you could see. Okay, so now the very beginning of, whoops, hold on. Let me get my annotator there. What happened to my annotator? There we go. Okay, there we go. So the very beginning of our Parsha, let's put our Parsha in place. Klal Yisrael has experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim. This is post Makas Becheres. They've left Egypt. They've experienced freedom. And Hashem, the Parsha begins where Hashem tells us that the way that they went towards Eretz Yisrael wasn't the short way, but rather the long way towards the Yam Suf. And Pharaoh hears this, that the Jews are wandering in the desert, seemingly lost, going in the wrong direction, headed towards the Yam Suf, completely lost. And he has regret for letting them go, and he chases them down. So after the very beginning of the Parsha tells us that Hashem sent them the long way towards the Yam Suf. It appeared that they were lost, even though, of course, they're being directed by the cloud and by the pillar of fire. They're not lost at all. So in the very first in our Parsha, Pharaoh is told this. Va'omar Paroi, and Paroi says, Pasuk Gimel, right here on the screen. Va'omar Paroi lebnei Yisrael, nevuchim heim ba'aretz. They're lost. They're trapped. Nevuchim means like more nevuchim. The Rambam, they're confused. They're trapped. They're lost. Sagar aleim midbar. The desert's closing up upon them. In other words, they're wandering around the desert. The desert's a very dangerous place to be. Obviously, to get lost in the desert is fatal, and this is exactly what Paro is saying. But I want to focus on the first 4 words of this verse. I'm going to read it again, and you tell me what's wrong here. Va'omar Paroi libnei Yisrael. Translate the words. Paroi said to Bnei Yisrael. What's wrong with that sentence? They weren't there. They weren't there. What do you mean Paroi said to Bnei Yisrael? Bnei Yisrael is wandering in the desert. The pasuk doesn't make any sense. What do you mean Va'omar Paroi Bnei Yisrael? Who's Bnei Yisrael? Who's he talking to? There's no Bnei Yisrael there. So the first place we look when we have obvious difficulties in a verse like this is we look at Rashi, right? What does Rashi say? Now, Rashi translates everything according to the most simple understanding. And he only brings in midrashic understandings when the simple understanding doesn't make any sense. And so what does Rashi say? Rashi says, Va'omar Paroi libnei Yisrael. Libnei Yisrael, says Rashi, al bnei Yisrael. Doesn't mean to. Libnei Yisrael doesn't mean to Bnei Yisrael, because to Bnei Yisrael makes no sense. What do you mean Pari speaking to Bnei Yisrael? He's not speaking to Bnei Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael's not there. So Rashi says it, and this is not an easy Rashi, because Rashi takes the words out of its simple meaning. because its simple meaning makes no sense. So Rashi says it means about Bnei Yisrael. Parai said about Bnei Yisrael, Nevuchim Mehem Ba'aret, that they're lost. And that's the only way that the verse makes any sense at all, according to its very simple meaning. Okay. There was a translation of Torah made by one of the preeminent students of Hillel, the famous Hillel and Shammai. Hillel had a student who we all know that student. His name is Rabbi Yonasan ben Azil. Today we go to his kever in Eretz Yisrael when we need shidduchim, right? He Amuka, right? He was, yeah, it worked. Yeah. Oh, you went there yourself, you're saying? Oh, wow. So
I went, but I also tried the other one, Shiur.
Oh, yeah? Hey, everything works. We'll try them all. When it comes to shidduchim, we'll try everything. So Yonasan ben Uzziel was a great tzaddik. Just a ben Torah like none other, to such an extent. It says when he was learning Torah, and the birds flying overhead would literally get burnt to a crisp from the energy from the Torah that he was learning. That's Yonasan ben Uzziel. So Yonasan ben Uzziel made a translation of the Torah into Aramaic, which was their English at that time. That was the spoken language. And his translation, so we know in certain English translations of Torah, like when we look in the English translation, some translate it exactly literally, and some of the English translations give explanations as well to help us understand the context. And Yonasan ben Uzziel's translation into Aramaic was one that actually gave context and explanation, not just word for word. And it's fascinating how Yonasan ben Uzziel translates this verse. The Omar Paroi li b'nei Yisrael. Paroi said to B'nai Yisrael. Now, we know B'nai Yisrael is not there. They're wandering in the desert. And Rashi says it means about B'nai Yisrael. Let's take a look at Yonasan ben Uzziel, what he said. And if you're here, it's the first line on the top of the handout. Targum Yonasan. So this is that pasuk translated in Aramaic. V'yemar Paroi, and Paroi said, Lidasan va'aviram. Whoa, 1 second here. Yonasan ben Uzziel just gave us an incredible insight, but that insight is very difficult to understand as well. V'yomar Paroi Lidasan va'aviram, who are the Bnei Yisrael, the Ishtar of Mitzrayim. Those were the Bnei Yisrael that were left in Egypt. They decided to stay. They didn't want to go. They didn't leave with everybody else. They stayed in Mitzrayim. Now, that is that's something very difficult to understand. What do you mean they stayed in Mitzrayim? What exactly does that mean? Dasan and Aviram stayed in Mitzrayim. We know a lot about Dasan and Aviram. In fact, the Torah tells us 4 different stories about Dasan and Aviram. And whenever the Torah, how many people does the Torah tell us 4 different stories about? Clearly, the Torah is trying to impart to us something about their character, who they were. Number 1, Dasan and Aviram were the 2 Jews who were fighting in Mitzrayim. That Moshe Rabbeinu, one of the early stories of Moshe Rabbeinu, the earliest story of Moshe Rabbeinu. When he comes out and he sees 2 Jews fighting, and it was Dasan and Aviram. And they were the ones that told Pharaoh that Moshe killed the Mitzri. That's story number 1 we know about them. Story number 2, when the man fell in the desert. And Moshe Rabbeinu told them the entire point of the man was to imbue emunah into Klal Yisrael, that Hashem provides for them. So only collect the amount that you need per day. That was it. That was all they were allowed to collect. And the Torah tells us that some people collected more than they were than the allotment for the day, because they didn't have the emunah that it would be there tomorrow, and that rotted and became wormy. And who were those people who defied Moshe, who defied Dasan and Aviram? That's the second story we know about them. Then when it came to the story of the Meraglim, and there were Jews who said, after the Meraglim came back, let's go back to Mitzrayim. And who was that who said, let's go back to Mitzrayim? Dasan and Aviram. And then, of course, the final story, the story of Korach and his rebelliousness. And in some of these stories, they're not listed by name. We sort of derive out that who they were. But by Korach's rebellion, they're very much listed by name, and they were very much part of the rebellion. And when Moshe Rabbeinu tried to seek peace and he tried to arrange a meeting with them, they were not coming. You could gouge our eyes out before we come to you, Moshe Rabbeinu. That was Dasan and Aviram. So the fact that the Torah tells us 4 different stories about the character of Dasan and Aviram, and 4 different pretty ugly stories. I mean, these were people who, you sometimes you just have people who are difficult human beings and enjoy fighting and complaining. And that seems to be Dasan and Aviram. It didn't seem to be that they had any overriding, some kind of ideology that they were attached to. That no, it seemed wherever they had a chance to argue and complain and fight with Moshe Rabbeinu and rebel against Moshe Rabbeinu, they took that chance, whatever the circumstances would be. This is who Dasan and Aviram were. But here's the question. A lot of questions. Number one, how could it be that they remained in Mitzrayim and remained alive? Everybody, didn't we learn about Makas Cheshach, that whoever didn't want to leave Mitzrayim died in Makas Cheshach, which was what was it, like 4/5 of the Jews. 80% of the Jewish people died in Makas Cheshach. And these were the people that didn't want to leave Mitzrayim. Well, Dasan and Aviram didn't want to leave Mitzrayim, as we see according to Targum Yonas and Menuzil. They're still, and yet they didn't die by Makas Cheshach. How could that be? Number two, if they stayed in Mitzrayim, then how do we have the story about Shlach and the Meraglim and the story about Parshas Korach, the rebellion of Korach? That's post-Mitzrayim, obviously. So if they stayed in Mitzrayim, why are they joining the Jewish people? How can that be? Which one is it? So it must be, according to the Targum Yonas and Ben Uziel, it must be that somehow they wanted to stay in Mitzrayim, and when Pharaoh chased the Jews across the Yam Suf, Dasan and Aviram joined him, and when all the Mitzrim were killed, Dasan and Aviram somehow survived and joined Klal Yisrael, and hence the story of Shlach and the story of Korach. What? How could that be? Dasan and Aviram, how could it be that they weren't killed in the Yam Suf with the Mitzrim? How could it be that they weren't killed in Makas Cheshach? These were not righteous people. These were clearly Rishoyim. I mean, the Torah tells us 4 different, very ugly stories about them to tell us the Torah is emphasizing their character. And yet somehow they survived Makas Cheshach. They survived Kriyas Yam Suf. They joined Klal Yisrael. How do we understand that? So I want to share with you this incredible explanation that I saw from Rabbi Yehuda Leib Diskin. And Rabbi Yehuda Leib Diskin was a great 19th century great scholar from Galicia. The last 20 years of his life, he moved to Eretz Yisrael. He founded an orphanage there, which I think is still there to this day. Yeah, it's still there, right? Yeah. So this is Yehuda Leib Diskin, great Talmid Chacham, wrote lots of different svarim, and this is his sefer on his Perush on the Chumash, and he gives just an unbelievable, beautiful explanation to all of this, puts all of this in place, and together with that teaches us such a powerful lesson for ourselves in our own Avodas Hashem every day. And those are the kind of pieces that I love the best. So before we actually jump into his piece, I want to preface a little bit. And again, we're going to go through some verses. So those who are here in person are going to be missing the verses, but I'll say them out loud. We need to have Chumashim here. I'm going to bring Chumashim here. So when we're actually doing you could look in the verses if you want to. So I'm going to bring back up the screen for a second. We're going to go back. We're going to go back all the way to Parshas Shmos, okay? To the very end of Parshas Shmos for this explanation. And what happened at the end of Parshas Shmos. Now, for those who remember the very end of Parshas Shmos, what happens? Moshe Rabbeinu has gone to Parai at Hashem's command and asked him to let the people go, let Klal Yisrael go, and Parai intensified the labor, right? He intensified the labor until the very end of Parshas Shmos, where the labor becomes so intense and so painful and so difficult that the Egyptians still keep the quota of bricks, but no longer are giving the straw to make the bricks to the Jewish people. And the quota is still there. And the Torah tells us that there was a sort of there were these shaitrim, these Jewish officers who the Mitzrim had set up Jewish officers, similar to what the Nazis did with capos. They set up Jewish officers to be the taskmasters over the Jews. And the Jewish officers were responsible if the Jews didn't fulfill their quota. This is the end of Parsha Shmais. And so the Pasuk tells us the Pasuk tells us at the very end of Parsha Shmais that when the shaitrim, when these Jewish officers, when the Jews didn't fulfill their quota of bricks, what happened? Vayuku sheitre b'nei Yisrael. The Egyptians beat the officers. They beat the shaitrim. Asher samur leim nikshe paro. These were the sheitre b'nei Yisrael that the nikshe paro, that Paro's taskmasters placed upon the Jewish people. And so when the quota wasn't filled, the Jewish taskmasters, the Jewish officers were beaten. And so they're being lamer. Why didn't you complete the task? Why didn't you bring all the bricks that you brought 3 days ago? We didn't have the straw. That didn't matter. And so these taskmasters, lost my plus here. So these these Jewish officers, were beaten. Now, okay, let me go all the way down to Pasuk. I think it's Chaf. Yes. So now the Parsha comes to an end, and the Pasuk tells us that the Yifku as Moshe as Aaron nitzavim likrasam b'tzeisam eis Paro, that as Moshe and Aaron were coming out of Paroi, that there were these Jewish officers who were there, who were beaten. And Vayemru Aleichem, and the Jewish officers say, Yira Hashem Aleichem v'yishbeit asher hibashtem es reichenu b'nei Paro. You made us despicable. You made us smell despicably. You made us give a foul odor in the eyes of Paroi, u'be'enei avodav, in the eyes of his servants. So these Jewish officers are screaming at Moshe and Aaron. They were beaten, and they're upset at Moshe and Aaron. Who were these Jewish officers? Take a look at Rashi here in Pasuk Chaf. Rashi says they were Dasan and Aviram. One of the Jewish officers were Dasan and Aviram. Now, these Jewish officers, the Gemara tells us that many of these Jewish officers who were beaten in the place of Klal Yisrael became the Sanhedrin. They had Ruach HaKodesh. They were divinely rewarded. But Dasan and Aviram, they obviously were not part of the Sanhedrin. But let's take a look now at the Maral Diskin, Yehuda Leib Diskin. Let's take a look at this piece. And now, based on the end of Parsha Shmais, how he describes this, the beginning of Parshas Beshalach. So let's take a look inside. So this is from the Chedushim Maral Diskin Al Teira Reish Parshas Beshalach. Dasan va'aviram hayu ben sheitrim shemasru atzman al Yisrael. Dasan and Aviram, says the Yehuda Leib Diskin, and obviously this he takes this from Rashi. Rashi learned that Dasan and Aviram were one of those officers who the sablu makes that they bore upon themselves. Makes, they took the whips. Kedei lahakal avedim al bnei Yisrael, in the place of bnei Yisrael, to make it easier for the Jewish people. So Dasan and Aviram may have been incredible Rishoyim. They may have rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem at every possible turn. And yet, there was some sliver of goodness there, to the extent that they felt a kinship with Klal Yisrael. And they took the beatings to make it easier for Klal Yisrael. K'di Isa Sham, Medrash Rabbah, say Parsha Shmais, the Divrei Rabbi Yechanan, Al Masha Amru, the Medrash brings, the Medrash in Parsha Shmais brings a statement from Rabbi Yechanan. When they said, Hibashtem es reichenu, that you made us give a foul odor in front of Paroi. What was the foul odor? Kimin hamakish shehiku eisen hamitzrim hayarechan mavish. because the wounds from their wounds from their whips, from their being whipped, became infected and was smelly. And so that's what they're when they say you gave us a foul smell, they're saying you caused us to be whipped. And this is Dasan and Aviram who's saying this. So Dasan and Aviram were one of the people who were from the Shekrim who were whipped, who took this beating on behalf of Klal Yisrael. So Yehuda Leib Diskin continues. Now the other Shetrim who gave themselves, who were Meiser Nefesh, who were willing to undergo physical sacrifice on behalf of another Jew, who they perhaps didn't even know. But this was how Klal Yisrael felt to each other, at least these Shetrim, that they were willing to take beatings on behalf of Jews. They were willing to take pain and suffering and sacrifice on behalf of Jews who they didn't even know. He says those Shetrim, the other Shetrim, Shemasru Atzmam al Yisrael v'siblu makas alehem, who took these beatings and took these whippings. Kamesha Kasav, as it says, the Yoku Shetrim b'nei Yisrael, the Shetrim b'nei Yisrael were beaten. He says, what happened? Elu zachash Ruach HaKodesh alehem. They were zecha to Ruach HaKodesh. Kamuva Shamba Medrash Rabba, as the Medrash says, and many of them became the part of the Sanhedrin. But Dasan and Aviram, Shalei Zachul Amilas Ruach HaKodesh, Dasan and Aviram weren't zeichet to Ruach HaKodesh. They didn't deserve Ruach HaKodesh. They weren't a keli. They weren't a vessel for Ruach HaKodesh. Mipnei Shahayu Macharfin and Magadfin, Ba'atzeisam al Hashem al Moshe, because they rebelled and cursed Hashem and Moshe Rabbeinu. So they clearly were not a vessel, a receptacle for Ruach HaKodesh. Ubekal zeis, but nevertheless, says Yehuda Leib Diskin, this is such an incredible chiddush. These are one of these chidushim that we would never know just from learning Parshas Beshalach on our own. This is why I love learning this stuff. Bekal zeis haschus hazu al masha hayu meisrim nafsham. Their schus and the fact that they were meiser nefesh, they were willing to literally give themselves up for Klal Yisrael, sacrifice, take beatings on behalf of Klal Yisrael. For that Mesiris Nefesh, v'sablu Yisuri Haguf, they bore painful afflictions to their own physicality, Kedei lahakal al Bnei Yisrael, to make it easier for the rest of Bnei Yisrael. That was definitely a schutz, and they deserved some level of reward for that. So this answers one of our questions. It was in this schus that they didn't die during the plague of darkness. This is why they still survived. Even though they didn't want to leave Mitzrayim. They were very happy in Mitzrayim. In Parshas Shlach, they want to go back to Mitzrayim. I mean, they were happy there. They didn't want to leave there. These were the classic people who should have died in Makas Cheshech. But that schus, the merit of sacrificing oneself for Avos Yisrael, that merit saved them during the plague of darkness. Ki ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekapeach schar kol beria al tov sha'asa. Such a beautiful line. Hashem never withholds reward for any creation that is deserving, for the good that they have done. They may have done incredible bad, incredible evil acts, incredible negativity. They may have cursed Hashem and Moshe Rabbeinu and rebelled at every chance they got. That is true, but that does not take away from the schus that they earned for their Mesiris Nefesh. You cannot equivocate them to the rest of the Jews who died in Makas Cheshech because of this incredible merit that they had.
Were they picked by the Egyptians or they volunteered?
It could be a combination of both, but it seems like they volunteered because we see at this first sign of trouble, they keep wanting to go back to Mitzrayim.
Thank you.
Ugh. Someone just stopped my recording here. That messes up the whole recording. There's no way to get it back now. That was my fault because I didn't use. No, it's already in the recording. Yeah, recording on here. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's frustrating. That was my fault. I should have put my phone in airplane mode. Okay, so let's go back to where I was. So yes, but one of the things this teaches us is the incredible reward that Hashem gives us, the incredible schus when we are willing to extend ourselves to the point of sacrifice on behalf of another Jew or another human being. He says, we can't compare them to the rest of the Jews who died in Makas Cheshech. This was an incredible schus that they had. Shahai lehem putrunin min ha-mitzrayim, v'hai lehem mitzrayim esher v'gedela v'lei ratzu latz mitzrayim. You had some Jews who they had it good in Egypt. You had some Jews who there was a caste system in Egypt. We spoke about this a few weeks ago. The Meshech Chochmah says there were even some Jews who enslaved other Jews. There was a certain caste system in Egypt. And there were certain Jews who said, hey, we like it in Gullus. You know, we have decent homes here. We have our families here. We like it in Gullus. We don't want to leave. So those who didn't want to leave stayed. So Elu, Masu, but given Elu, those were the ones who died during the 3 days of darkness. Ki Elu lo hishtatvu b'tzaran shel Yisrael, because they didn't participate in the tsar, in the pain of the Jewish people. V'lo lachu chelak ma'aveda kasha, they didn't take a chelak of the slavery. Dasan and Aviram may have been one of them, but Dasan and Aviram bore pain on behalf of Klal Yisrael. Aval Dasan va'Aviram shalei ratzu latzeis yachad Moshe v'Yisrael, but Dasan and Aviram who didn't want to go out with Klal Yisrael. I mean, this is what Rishayim they were. They rebelled against Hashem. They rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu. Yamsuf and Yitzias Mitzrayim is happening, and they're no, thank you, we'll stay here. But notwithstanding this incredible, and the Torah goes out of its way to tell us how negative they were. 4 different stories, and even more that are alluded to. And yet, such an incredible, unbelievable schus of willing to sacrifice themselves on behalf of Klal Yisrael, willing to extend themselves on behalf of Klal Yisrael. Let's just finish off this piece. They remained in Egypt. Schus ha-mitzvah, the schus of the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, teilu lehem la'avras hayam. That not only saved them from the plague of darkness, but it also saved them from Kriyas Yamsuf. It was what empowered them to survive Kriyas Yamsuf, and hence they joined Klal Yisrael on the other side. And that's why we have the stories of Shlach and the stories of Parshas Korach. It is such a powerful lesson, because we go through life really, and our primary focus is what's best for me and what's best for my family. And that's where our focus is. What's best for me, what's best for my family. And that's natural. That's our natural inclination. Naturally, we are self-centered human beings. That is our animalistic nature. But we also have a godly nature that empowers us to overcome that self-centeredness that we have naturally, that empowers us to give of ourselves, to extend ourselves beyond our comfort zone for another human being, for another Jew. And it really has to do with how we perceive life, how we look at life. You know, there is a beautiful Elimelech of Lezensk on Parshas Beshalach. I should have done that piece as well because it fits in so beautifully with this piece. And he says that when Klal Yisrael is going through Kriyas Yamsuf, it speaks about it in 2 different ways. Firstly, it says they were B'tei Chayam B'Yabasha. They went B'tei Chayam, they went into the sea, and yet B'Yabasha, they walked on dry land, which that describes the experience of Kriyas Yamsuf. That's how it's first described the first time. They went B'tei Chayam B'Yabasha, into the sea, and yet it was dry. And then in the next parak where it's describing it again, it says they were B'Yabasha B'tei Chayam. It says it in reverse. They were on dry land, B'tei Chayam, into the sea. And Rabbi Elimelech of Lezensk, the Noam Elimelech, one of the great early Hasidic masters, asks the question, why does it reverse the language? First, it's B'tei Chayam B'Yabasha, and then it's B'Yabasha B'tei Chayam. And he explains as follows so beautifully, and it ties in with this so beautifully as well. He explains that in the Yam, Klal Yisrael experienced a plethora of miracles. There were miracles in the Yam. I mean, Kriyas Yamsuf itself, in and of itself, was an outstanding miracle, but notwithstanding the miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf itself. The Medrash lists multiple miracles that happened at the bottom of the sea. That fresh spring water came out from the walls so that they were able to drink as they crossed through the Yam. That there were full trees in full bloom of fruits all along the Yam Suf. That there were treasures of gold and silver and diamonds on the floor of the Yam Suf. That at some point Moshe Rabbeinu has to tell them, hey, come on, enough with enough with the gelt, let's go, we have a journey here. There was multiple miracles in the Yam. And that's a question in and of itself. Hashem doesn't make miracles for no reason. Why were all these miracles there? That's a shiur in and of itself. But says that Noam Elimelech, that when they were B'tei Hayam and they were walking via Basha, they saw all of these incredible miracles. But here's the true reality, that we also see miracles every day, every one of us. The truth is, the beat of our heart is a miracle. The sunrise is a miracle, right? Dew on the ground is a miracle. The rain is a miracle. Nature is just a miracle that happens every day, and we're just desensitized to it. You know, if you would, a child who was living in the midbar and eating the man, and they said, Hamotzi lecha mina shamayim. That was the bracha on the man, Hamotzi lecha mina shamayim. And the child who was born in the midbar, that was the only bread they ever saw. If you would take that child and show them bread growing from the ground, that would be an incredible miracle. If you would show them wheat growing from that, they would be astounded by that. How could wheat grow from the earth? How is that possible? They'd be astounded by that because they'd never seen that before. For us, we're just used to it. Like I said, nature is just a miracle that happens constantly so that we're desensitized to it. The fact that the sun never tires out. The sun rises exactly in the same way every single day is an absolute miracle. But we're just desensitized to the miracle. So there are some people, says the Noam Elimelech, says Rabbi Elimelech of Lizensk, when Kriyas Yamsuf is spoken about in the next parak, it says, B'yabasha b'tei chayam, that there are some tzaddikim, he says, who are able to walk on B'yabasha, walk on dry ground, on the dry ground that we're walking on today, and feel as if they're b'tei chayam. They're B'yabasha, they're walking on dry ground, they're seeing nature, but they feel b'tei chayam. That was the point of Kriyas Yamsuf. The ultimate point of Kriyas Yamsuf was to bring us to this understanding that there's a creator in the world, that everything that happens is completely under his control, and it's all miraculous. That we have to see the Yad Hashem, not just when we're B'tei Chayam, B'yavasha, but when we are B'yavasha, we have to feel as if we're B'tei Chayam. That's how Noam Elimelech explains it. It's a mindset. If we go through life feeling Hashem's presence, seeing Hashem's presence everywhere, feeling that presence with me, that's what Kriyas Yamsuf was meant to imbue into the hearts and minds of Klal Yisrael. As they said, Zeh Keli Vanvehu, they saw Hashem. This is my God. They were able to point, Zeh Keli Vanvehu. It says the Nevi'us, that every single Jew, even the lowliest child and maidservant, was able to see a level of godliness that Yecheskel, the Navi Yecheskel, was unable to perceive. They saw Hashem, and they lived with that vision. But the whole point of it is that even after that's over, even after we are B'yabasha, we still have to feel we're B'tei Chayam. And so when we live life in that manner, when I live life with a godly consciousness, then life is not just simply about myself, about making sure I'm comfortable and my family is comfortable. When I live with that divine consciousness, I'm willing to take upon myself to stretch myself way beyond my comfort zone for a Jew who I don't even know. Because this is Am Yisrael, this is Klal Yisrael, this is Hashem's people. I'm living with divine consciousness. I have a higher purpose. But when my purpose in life is simply to make my life comfortable for myself and my family, if I have no higher purpose, then it's a very hard stretch. It's a very hard ask to ask me to stretch myself beyond my comfort zone. But when I live with, when I be a basha and I feel I'm b'tei hayam, I'm absolutely willing to sacrifice myself on behalf of others because I live with godly consciousness. I'm not just living for me. And so this as Elimelech Vozensky, this is the whole purpose of Kriyas Yamsuf. This was the message, and that's why it says initially, B'tei Hayam B'Yavasha, but at the end, there would be a Basha B'tei Hayam. Even when they were on the B'Yavasha, on the dry land, they felt B'tei Hayam. They felt Hashem's presence. And now Dasan and Aviram, clearly rebellious against Hashem. Rebellious against Hashem, rebellious against Moshe Rabbeinu. They didn't feel any of that. And yet stretch themselves beyond out of a feeling of achdus, love, whatever it may be for their fellow Jew. They were rewarded with this incredible schar. And the Torah alludes all of this to us in one letter. Va'omar paro lebnei Yisrael. Who are the Bnei Yisrael? We're meant to ask. See, when we learn Chumash, we're meant to ask these questions. Who is the Bnei Yisrael? We're meant to try to inquire. The Torah often speaks to us explicitly, but more often not, the Torah speaks to us in layers. And our job, see, we're not just passive recipients of Torah. We're meant to be active learners of Torah. That's what Hashem wanted. That's why He didn't give us all of Torah explicit. We're meant to partner with Hashem in learning and discovering and uncovering the messages in Torah. And this is one of the message. Vayomer Parach Libnei Yisrael. In that one letter, Libnei Yisrael, where it's alluding to Dasan and Aviram who stayed in Mitzrayim. We're meant to ask all of these questions, and we wouldn't do it on our own, but Baruch Hashem, we have Rabbi Yehuda Leib Diskin, this great master, this great Torah master who laid it all out for us and taught us such an incredible lesson that Parshas Beshalach is imbuing into our minds and into our hearts. That when we live life with a Kriyas Yamsuf mindset, when we are B'Yavasha, and yet we still feel that we're B'tei Hayam, then we can stretch ourselves beyond. Using the example of the low, if Dasan and Aviram can do this, then certainly you and I can do this. Dasan and Aviram were on the lowliest level that you could possibly be on. So you and I can certainly do this. And that's the real message of Parshas Beshalach. And this is the true understanding of what Yetzias Mitzrayim, what redemption, what freedom is all about. The whole Yetzias Mitzrayim experience, the whole freedom experience, how we understand freedom as Jews is not how the world understands freedom. Freedom doesn't simply mean I am now free with no external taskmaster and I can do whatever I want. That's not freedom in Judaism, because in Judaism, we believe that we have another taskmaster, that one in here, our nature, that we're often enslaved to. And it's very hard to overcome. And our nature is very self-centered and very egocentric. Real freedom means, as it says in Pirkei Avos, Ein ben churin elamisha osek b'Torah. Real freedom means not just liberation from my external taskmasters, but liberation from my internal taskmaster, from my nature that tells me live a selfish, egocentric life. Freedom means to live a life of meaning, that you are free to actualize your spiritual potential, to live a life of purpose, of meaning, of love, of depth, of majesty. You are free to absolutely ensure that your life will have made a difference for you having been here. You are free to ensure that your life will make a difference in the lives of others and ultimately bring the world to its ultimate fruition, the coming of Mashiach. That's what freedom means. That's what Parshas Beshalach is all about. That's what Kriyas Yamsuf is all about. That's ultimately what the story of Dasan and Aviram is all about. That we have a capacity to live a higher life, to live a deeper life, to live a life of one of giving, one that transcends my own selfish, egocentric nature, to extend myself on behalf of others, even to the point of sacrifice, even to the point of pain. And when we do that, we can't imagine and we cannot fathom what the rewards are. If Dasan and Aviram can be rewarded with such incredible rewards to survive the Makas Cheshach, to be rewarded with all of the miracles of Kriyas Yamsov and survive Kriyas Yamsov, Dasan and Aviram were given that reward. Imagine the reward that waits for us when we are willing to extend ourselves and ready to extend ourselves beyond our nature, to experience true freedom. That's Parshas Beshalach. Okay, powerful insight from Maral Diskin. I just wanted to share all that. I love this piece. It's one of my favorite pieces in the entire Chamishi Chumshi Torah, and I wanted to share that with you as well. So I hope everybody enjoyed the shiur. It should be in the schutz of Refuah Shlema for those who needed a Refuah Shlema, and the schutz of Aliyas and Neshama for those who needed a Aliyas and Neshama, and the schutz of the two newborn grandsons to our shiur members as well. We wish them all Hatzlacha and Bracha. And should be Gadul L'Teira L'Chupah L'Maisim Tevim. Amen. Huh? Yeah.